Good morning, everyone. I'm Gretchen Musicant, and I'm a member of the social justice team here at Westminster. The social justice team forums are built around a common theme every year, and this program year, the theme is Building Solidarity Together. And you can see we have some art represented there that helps us think about that. And the theme goes on to say, walking alongside all God's people, striving for a more just world, acting courageously to transform social systems and relationships. This morning's forum is the first of a two-part series on voting in Minnesota. We are pleased to welcome Michelle Witte, Executive Director of the League of Women Voters of Minnesota, and Katie Smith, Director of Elections and Voter Services for the City of Minneapolis. Michelle has served in her role since 2017, and is deeply passionate about serving voters and committed to civic engagement through the work of the 35 community-based chapters of the League of Women Voters Minnesota. Katie Smith leads a dedicated team of professionals at the City of Minneapolis who share her passion for ensuring that every eligible voter has the opportunity to exercise their right to vote. Together, they will discuss the role of their respective organizations in helping ensure elections are fair and accurate, and highlight practices in place to safeguard citizens' voices. Before we get started, just a reminder, those who are attending here in person, please raise your hand if you have a question. We'll bring a microphone to you. And even though you might think, oh, my voice is loud, I don't need one, we need you to use the microphone so that those on the live stream can hear your question. For those attending on live stream, please submit your comments or questions to the chat, and we'll monitor those and we'll raise them on your behalf here in the room. As part of our ongoing effort to promote respectful conversations around concerns in our community, the social justice team has established guidelines for social justice forums that you now, well, that's part of what you see, and next you're going to see the actual guidelines, which you now see on the screen. This morning, I'd like to highlight our first point, which is equity of voices. We benefit from hearing a variety of voices. Let's leave room for other perspectives. Please take a minute to review all the guidelines. And then I'd like to start with a short prayer. Let us pray. Holy One, God of justice, breathe into us today a spirit of curiosity and humility. Help us engage with mindfulness, following the lead of voices from our community. Guide our speech and our self-awareness, so that we may honor the divine in all people. Amen. So now, please join me in welcoming, I believe, that Michelle will lead us off.
I prefer to walk around a bit. Good morning, good morning. You might have heard there's an election coming up. So we're going to talk about that. Next week, you get Secretary of State Steve Simon. So he is talking about all of the new election laws, of which we had 32. New election laws designed in 2023, a few more in 2024, but that help to further expand access to elections and to support the integrity and safety of our elections. So oftentimes I do that. So I like doing that one, but we gave that to him. So he's going to talk about that, and we're going to audit him today. We're going to say why we believe and know our Secretary of State and others who are working on elections are fair and accurate. So the other thing is, I hope all of you today, including my neighbor Frank, who just walked in the room. Good morning, neighbor Frank. Walk away with one thing today. And one thing is, you are all influencers in this room. You may know, you think about influencers, people online, Taylor Swift and other people who have, their megaphone. You may not be that person, but you all have a sphere of influence in this election and every election, to be able to educate people, answer questions, and maybe someone in your family or friends or colleagues to say, do you have a plan to vote? Do you have a plan to vote? So I'm hoping you'll all walk away today with a little more information of how to do that and how to be involved and engaged in this election. So first of all, I want to tell you a few things about the League of Women Voters. We've been around for a mere 104 years, so again, we were formed right after the 19th Amendment was passed, because the women who won the vote at that time did not just want the vote for the privilege it was, but for the justice that it could all do. And actually, I like to tell the story about how in Minnesota, we actually had an amazing partnership between African-American women and white women here. The African-American women in Rondo, we had Nellie Griswold Francis, who was a fabulous woman who led the Every Woman Suffrage Club. And the history of, we've now found like 40 or so of their names. Hard to find women's names in the 1920s because they're all their husbands' names. So it's a little harder to identify them. But we know not only were they active, they were working on communicating with Clara Euland, who was the founder of the League of Women Voters, but they also all voted. And actually the first vote in front, or the first lobby issue that we believe happened from women after they got the vote in 1920 was from Nellie Griswold Francis, who lobbied the legislature on the anti-lynching bill. This was just after the 4 black men were killed in Duluth and were lynched in Duluth, let's say that. And so she brought the anti-lynching bill forward and it passed. So we all vote. We want to vote because we want things to happen. We want things to stay the same. We want things to change. And also, I just want to, set the tone. Spoiler alert, we don't always get what we want when we vote. That's kind of like built into the pie, right? Someone wins, someone loses. That's how it goes, again and again and again. It's supposed to be that way, right? So part of what we're talking about, I think, of government and elections is just how we handle our differences. And in Minnesota, we've got a lot of them, right? We're extraordinarily diverse, a lot of issues. So I want to kind of set that stage about what it means to be nonpartisan. So the League is nonpartisan. Being nonpartisan means we do not support or oppose any candidate or political party. Now, that isn't what a lot of people say. We also, however, do work at levels of government on vital issues. We study issues, take action on issues, and lobby at the Capitol for things like fabulous ERA, led by my wonderful friend Betty Folliard. And we spend many hours at the Capitol lobbying for issues. Issues are important. Issues are not partisan. Okay, everybody repeat after me. Issues are not partisan. Even though people think they are, we can't help what political parties choose to support or not support. The majority of our issues, really a lot of them are 80, 50 years old, and we haven't changed a lot of our issues, although we keep adapting and updating them. But unfortunately, the climate we're in, if you believe in a certain issue, that's a partisan experience. So we're in a new world in that way, right? Our mission, of course, is informed and active participation in government and very committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we are very activist grassroots organizations. So a lot of people think, oh, that League of Women Voters, they're just out there registering people, which is what we do, a lot of it. But we also, are very active on all levels of government. We have LWVUS, we have our state leagues, and then we all have local leagues out in the community from Rochester to Park Rapids to Bemidji, all over. So no two leagues are identical because, as we know, elections, or politics is local, right? We hear that and say that. And so are our elections. They're local. So we're going to talk about that. Our impact, we'll just kind of go through. So voter registration, these are kind of the big things we do. And a lot of what we're going to talk about today then kind of is this notion of how do we know our elections are fair and accurate? And I wanted to kind of set that up because really what the League of Women Voters has done and continues to do is to inform people about the candidates about who they are, what they do, because voting is a complex thing. It's a big responsibility. But the first thing is to get everyone registered. So you'd think by now, everyone, who isn't registered? Well, we have like 3 new classes of voters this year. First of all, we do all of the voter registration for newly naturalized citizens, so which is really exciting. So after they get their citizenship, almost 98% of them will stop and register to vote, which is very exciting to see all the new people coming. But this year, we're doing a lot more with registration. I'll talk about as we go through the slides, because we can now pre-register 16 and 17-year-olds. And we were back here, when I was here a couple years ago, we were working hard advocating for restoring the vote to people who are no longer incarcerated, living in our communities, but with a felony sentence. They might still be on probation or parole. And we won that one. So that was a 20-year battle, right? And so now we have all of these, like almost 55,000 Minnesotans can vote, but also the people who for a long time didn't know whether, well, can I vote or not vote? I'm not sure. So it's probably a lot larger than that. So we're still registering voters. Candidate forums are a big thing. You'll see the League of Women Voters. We'll do almost 300 candidate forums over the next few years. And then Vote 411, that's our big, if you go, what was that again? Vote 411, remember that, because that is our statewide nonpartisan candidate guide. We are the only ones who do a statewide, every single race down to soil and water boards, every single issue, and we know because we're working on it and trying to get all that information in. It'll publish next week on the 17th before early voting, which starts on, Katie can't answer, but nope. When does early voting start? Quiz. September 20th, which will be next Friday. Yep, voting starts for the election next Friday. So we have Vote 411. You can find out what's on your ballot. We have a wonderful Secretary of State website, too, Secretary of State in their website, but we do provide access to that. But what they can't do is tell you about the candidates. And so we ask candidates, you know, their questions, and so, you know, on a few key issues, and we have all that information in there. So, because I often say to people, you know, if we want to prevent mis and disinformation, the best way, right, to have a good garden, living next to a fabulous gardener, is to have good soil, right? So if we can keep seeding the soil with the truth and the facts, that's how we prevent weeds from growing. So think about that as we talk today about how we want people to see our elections as being fair and accurate because of the great soil we have that is there. We also do a lot with youth civic engagement, and I'm going to come back to that. So again, I'm just kind of flicking through here. So what's really exciting about, I think, all of what we do with the League of Women Voters is we're just always helping people find their voice. Who is it in the community? We work a lot now, too, sometimes in a lot of partnerships with people who are marginalized often. So like community action programs, people who work with people in poverty, people who are homeless. There's lots of people out there for whom their voice is not being heard. How can we help them express that? So again, we talked about, this has been very exciting. This is me right here. Just so you know, there I am. There we go. Yep. But kind of what's also sort of symbolic about that, which I talk about here, is that, you know, in doing this work, a lot of it in working with so many great diverse organizations has been finding our lane sometimes. And while we were leaders, a lot of people have stepped up to lead, and we really took more of what we call an ally role. And so we don't always have to be front and center in the work we do. And this was one of those where we were excited to have carried the ball for a long time, but then a lot of other people stood up too. So that was an exciting moment. Still is. Also, I will say that since then, I've been able to go to several correctional facilities. So they have transition fairs as people are about to leave prison behind, and they're getting ready, and there'll be a room like this set up with housing and recovery and jobs and all kinds of resources that people can have when they leave. So now we are there too. We've gone to every single transition fair, along with expungement clinics that the Attorney General has been offering. We find a lot of people, especially disproportionately people of color, Native Americans, are carrying around a felony sentence due to marijuana possession, and now that that is legal, they're expunging those felonies and opening up new lives for people. So we go there too and register a lot of people who've actually not been incarcerated for many years, but just weren't sure. Now we have a clear, bright line. If you are not living and no longer incarcerated, you can vote. So it's really fun to work with those guys and the women in Shakopee, and when they realize it, just to see the power of the vote, like, oh, really? Wow, amazing. So the other thing is the 16 and 17-year-olds. So the interesting thing about 16 and 17-year-olds is that, well, what we find in 18 to 24-year-olds in the state of Minnesota, they are voting almost 20 points less than the average in Minnesota. And in 22, they voted it went even 8% down further. But when they are registered, when you look at the information of what about registered people 18 to 24, they're voting at almost 90%. So registration matters, because think of yourself, what were you thinking? You know, 16, 17, 18, like you're going to college, it's just not like top of brain, right? But we want to get that civic activity going from the beginning. And so getting them registered, and also we have a new civics bill, right? In the state of Minnesota, civics will be taught in 11th and 12th grade, so that there will be more of that. So that's a good partnership with them. So we're very excited to do that. And so we just kind of went through all that. So we are working on, we're actually going to Bemidji tomorrow. I'm going to Bemidji with Secretary of State, and we will be up there. We are partnering with, so Legal Marijuana Now Party was still a major party when we started this, although they're not now. But anyway, they're still involved. And with the DFL and the Republican Party, we are all working together with the Secretary of State on National Voter Registration Day, which is Tuesday, to register and pre-register high schools across the state. So there's about 600 high schools. We have about 125 high schools who will be on our live virtual thing that we've got going for our event, and Secretary Simon will be there. We've got a lot of youth voices. So, and then we're going to do registration right in the classroom in Black Duck. Get out your phones, get out your Google Chromebooks or whatever, and then we're going to do it also live for all the 11th and 12th graders in the auditorium at Bemidji. And we're taping that and also getting those resources out. So we're really working hard with high schools this year. So if you know any high school, even if they don't participate on Tuesday, they can get a copy of this, and a lot of the recording, because there'll be how to do it and then how to get the voter guide and all of that. But again, a lot of the schools came to us because of groups that said, hey, I want my school. I have a school, my son's school, my daughter's, my grandchildren. Hey, are you guys participating? Again, influencers, you've got more influence than you think, okay? So that's going to be an exciting week. So there's this whole scope of work, right? We're educating, informing voters. And then came people who are now worried about the quality of our elections. So we've actually added a whole new scope, right, to our work, which is, and being part of this, being a trusted source forever and watching the integrity of our system. And so many people are election judges. Again, another thing to do. All of you are needed to be an election judge, but we have been a longstanding witness to election integrity. And unfortunately, we all see that fiction is overriding facts in many areas. Rumors are threatening our election integrity, and I've been in those rooms. and the irony is, I've been in, like I was in this wonderful little township in the snowy day in this little Catholic church pavilion where the people were arguing about mail-in ballots. Because some of the small places, they just get ballots. Some of the small towns just get ballots because they don't have a polling place because they're so small. So they wanted to go back to in-person voting. So some people are really worried about mail-in ballots, but then I'll be in another place, so be in Anoka County, Sherburne County, Rice County, Dakota County, some of the places where we're finding people who don't believe in the integrity of our elections, they're worried about the tabulators and the role of in-person voting. So people have concerns across the board, and they all have answers, and they've all been given the answers, but sometimes people don't like the answers. So we have to work a lot harder now. So the new laws we talked about, and again, I'll let Secretary Simon speak to those, but there are so many new laws. I mean, right now, for people to be able to vote. And certainly one of the biggest, most exciting ones, I think, is that you can now be a permanent vote from home person. You know, you can be a permanent absentee voter and say, yeah, I don't want to go into the polling place anymore, just send me my ballot, right? So that's a really great thing for anyone who might have limitations or disabilities or just doesn't want to deal with that. So anyway, we're all working together and getting people to get that information out through the candidate forums that you'll see that the League and others are doing. Know the candidates. Number one reason people, when you do ask them why they don't vote, if it wasn't access, it's I didn't know the candidates. So that's so important. So we talked about this, voting is not partisan either, right? And so we also work with a lot of nonprofit agencies and places and churches and everyone. We can talk about voting. It's not partisan to talk about voting. It's not partisan to encourage people to vote. We want to get the word out. So we also have, actually this morning in the paper, automatic voter registration was in the paper. So we now have what we call automatic voter registration, which means that when you're interacting with the DMV, you will automatically be, if you're updating your license or getting your new license, you automatically be registered to vote. But as Secretary Simon would say, it's not automatic. There's still a whole lot of processes going on in the background to make sure that only eligible people are being allowed to vote. But that is really probably will really open the door to more registration. But here's what's happening, and these are the types of things we're facing, is that there's huge backlash among people. As you might have heard in the news, people are also have various things about immigrants, right? Various concerns about immigrants which are really unfounded and unfair. And one of them is, in Minnesota, we also have a new bill called Driver's Licenses for All. And Driver's Licenses for All means that people who are undocumented, don't have papers, but are working and living in our communities, that they can get a driver's license, which is great for everyone, because people who are worried about people who are not documented, well, now they're documented in the sense they've registered, they have a license. It's just safer for them, safer for everyone. Excuse me. But people will say, well, no, they could just take their driver's license and they could register to vote. Well, no, they can't. So let's just be really clear. It's very clear on many levels. No, you cannot, because you do need to have proof of citizenship in order to register to vote. So if you were not registered, and let's take like same-day voter registration, right? In Minnesota, for 50 years, we've had same-day voter registration. If somebody shows up and they show their driver's license as a way of registering, but they're undocumented, what happens is all of that information, like on same-day voting, all of that information, you will be allowed to vote, but all that information will be audited on the back end. So they would look up that driver's license and say, you were not eligible to vote, and you signed an oath. Because everybody here, when you vote, whether you vote by mail or you vote in person, you are signing an oath. Remember, it used to be the big book. Now we all have electronic poll books, and you probably don't realize that when you're signing, you're saying under oath, I am who I say I am, and I live where I say I do, and if I am lying today, I can be charged with felony perjury. Like, most people really don't want to do that, right? Like, who wants to do that? Especially somebody who is here, is undocumented, working and living in their community. Why would they want to do this, right? So intent is part of the deal. But also, they would be found, they would be arrested, and they would be deported. There's every incentive in place, but there is that audit on the back end. So when you hear people talk about, well, I don't know how we can, those non-citizens voting, you're going to learn today. No, they can't, because we do check that citizenship is in place. So let's say an undocumented immigrant goes to the DMV and gets their license. They will not be automatically registered to vote, because you do have to prove citizenship when you get your license. Now, most of us have had our license for a long time. I won't say how many years, right? But at that time, remember, we had to show a birth certificate. You have to have some form of citizenship when you first register to vote. You don't have to reprove it every time, but you do have that on there. So because people, and again, it's not automatic. The Secretary of State's office is constantly getting information from the Social Security Office, from INS, from DVS, from the Minnesota Department of Health when people die. There's a back-end process that's in place. So people will not be able to vote, and if they do, they will be charged. So that's really important right now. It's a big thing in southern Minnesota, a big myth to try to bust, and we've been getting letters to the editor out there, et cetera. So I'm going to kind of run through because I want you to hear from Katie. So Katie can also talk about what it's really like on the ground here in Minneapolis doing this. But I want to run through what we have a whole site on our website called Elections 411. So if you go to lwvmn.org, Elections 411, we document really quickly all of the safeguards. I mean, there's probably more than that, but the main safeguards that are in place to help you feel confident about your vote and the integrity of your vote. One thing we will add, actually just last week, Virgil Weibel from St. Thomas actually did a whole study on how many people who are not citizens, out of 13 million votes cast in Minnesota over the last 20 years, only 3 people were ever found to have cast a vote. And so, so we try to keep posting the information too. Here's a new article, here's the research. We know that this is how it is. And human beings are doing elections, right? There can be errors, but they're never enough to throw a whole election. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah, we got to do the microphone.
How are votes by people who are not eligible to vote, how is it caught at the back end?
So it would be caught because everybody, when you're actually, so there's 2 processes, but to not get too in the weeds, 2 things. So let's just say before same day. So same day voter registration is one process. In general, all the rest of the time, if you go to vote, you have to be registered to vote. You have to be in the statewide voter registration system. So they're looking for you, and if you're not there, you're not going to be able to vote. In order to get into the statewide voter registration system, you had to have participated in, when you register to vote, you have to say, I am 18, I am no longer incarcerated, I am a citizen. And so then those, again, and you have to use ID. So people say, well, you don't have voter ID in Minnesota. Yes, we do. It's at the time of voter registration. So everyone has to prove that they use a social security number or a driver's license number when they first register to vote. Or let's say you lapse, like a lot of times, sometimes people have had health issues. They don't vote for a few years. Voter rolls are thinned out over time, and you might have to re-register or update your voter registration because you moved, right? You always have to use a document that is checked on that back end. It's the same thing with dead people. No, dead people do not vote. There's a constant set of, inputs for the statewide voter registration system. On the same day voter registration, we've had this for 50 years, right? So there's nothing new about this, and that people come, and if you falsify your record, it gets caught because it's really like there's an automatic built in there because they will check, okay, you use that driver's license. Now we're going to have to, they'll check that driver's license and realize you were not eligible to vote. So there is a backside process to figuring that out. So they wouldn't. So the point is, yeah. So I'll repeat the question. So people will say, yeah, but they were allowed to vote. So on same-day voter registration, if somebody voted and then they found out, oh, you weren't supposed to vote, it's true. You can't pull your vote out at that point in time. But anybody at any point in time, what I say is that anybody at any point in time could lie and you can't pull their vote back. But that's why we have, so imagine, that would have to happen by the tens of thousands to affect an election. Because when elections are close, remember, Brooklyn Park mayor most recently, 1 vote. There's recounts, right? Recounts. There's automatic recounts when things are close. And if somebody really feels like a whole bunch of people didn't vote correctly, you can ask for recounts. I've been part of a recount with my work on, I used to serve on our school board. We did, levies and bonds. And so we won one election by 5 votes, which still is like, oh my gosh. And so there are all of these pieces in place to be able to say, at the end of the day, yes, people are people and mistakes can happen, but they're not enough to throw an election. And we also will talk a little bit before at the very end about, because our work now doesn't end on Election Day, nor does Katie's, because the elections aren't over till they're certified. And so we have an audit in Minnesota. We have a post-election review. All 87 counties will have canvassing board that will look for irregularities that might have happened. They will look for, they will recount and hand count a certain amount of precincts and a certain amount of races. So there are many levels. So I hope that helps. Again, voter registration. You have to prove your identification and your residence and your affirmation of eligibility to vote. That's what gets you in the state voter registration system. So ballots are only distributed to those. And same-day voter registration, a lot of people have a lot of questions about that, but you have to have a proof of residence. Now, vouching, you've heard about that vouching rule. Well, I got to vouch. We had neighbors move in, and they were in between houses, and all the electric bills were on her name, and she was still in Missouri, and Will was here, but you have to be a registered voter in that precinct to vouch for somebody. So that also can be double checked, in terms of being able, and you have to think about that. Why, well, I'm gonna what do I want, a felony perjury, right, on this? So, so there are those systems and those safeguards. Also, in 2018, the independent auditors of the state legislature, this was actually put in place. This was a study that was done at the leadership of Mary Kiffmeyer, who used to be the Republican Secretary of State, and they audited vigorously, looked at races, recount. We had the Frank and Coleman race, those of you who were around. It was total recount of every single ballot in Minnesota as another proof that and again, in that election it was like 0.0001, right? That, yes, there are some problems here and there, but never enough to throw a whole election. And they did not find any significant numbers of ineligible voters, and they looked very hard. Voting in person, I also think the other thing, which is so amazing to me, everything's done on a bipartisan basis, right? When you open the doors in the morning, when you take the tabulator out. And there's 3 checks. I forget where my, we'll get to that. Okay. So anyway, there's 3 checks in the system. So when, they count, when they'll say at the beginning of the day, how many ballots did we give out? How many ballots are in the box? And how many ballots are counted on the tabulator. It's like running a till, right, at a store. All of that is audited every day on a bipartisan basis. You can't vote twice. And people will say, well, I could automatically register to vote, and then I could get an absentee ballot. And no, you can't, because if you voted, that is in it's already noted there. You can also get an absentee ballot, decide, I really want to go in person. And then they'll know we gave you that ballot, and then they'll spoil that ballot, and then you can vote in person. Dead people can't vote. Now, what is true is that people could vote early and then die, which is what happened to my mom. My mom, 22, voted early in September and died October 9th. And so that can happen. In a lot of ways, it was a legally cast vote, however, in an early voting. But I did, and they do encourage people to, I did call them and ask them, because you can claw back a vote or claw back a ballot before they start counting. And that now went from 7 to 18 days. So up to 18 days before the election, if somebody dies or if somebody voted and they wanted to change their vote, you can pull that back. So, okay, let's see, here we go. All right, so really quick, because I want Katie to talk about it. The other thing I really want to talk about quickly is the absentee ballot process, because I would say mail-in voting is like it's like the Fort Knox, right? Because if you've done it, you know, you got all these envelopes, right? You can only get that ballot because you were recognized on the state voter registration system. When you get it, it will be to you, and it's uniquely barcoded, right? So this notion of ballot stuffing just can't happen. I mean, you can't just find random. There aren't random ballots. They're all ID'd to someone who then has to reprove that you have to put your identity on there with some sort of identifying information, and you have to sign it, and then a witness has to sign it. I mean, this thing is like, you know, if you're really worried, mail-in voting is the way to go. And then it's opened at a ballot board by 2 people who are going to witness it. So there's so many pieces in place. So anyway, I am going to just go through these because, again, that we talked about that ballot board and because Katie's here. So many things that are in place to ensure the integrity. I will say really quickly, too, about the tabulators. Again, the tabulators aren't, you know, that's one of the big groups out there, the Minnesota Patriots, Midwest Swamp Watch. There are groups actively trying to say our tabulators are inaccurate. The tabulators were put in place by the Republican Secretary of State, Mary Kiffmeyer. They were put in place by her so that to protect the integrity. So if the voter put in a ballot that was going to be spoiled because maybe they didn't fill it out right or filled out too many things or whatever, that it would be kicked back to them and they could go cast and, you know, could do it before they left. So, and these are not hooked up at all to any internet until the very, very end when all the votes have already been tallied as a final defining moment. So they're not, when you're putting your ballot in, they're not going into cyberspace. So, okay, so now Katie's going to talk about a few more things because she does this all the time live, and we're both really happy to answer any questions, and then we'll talk a little bit about the post-election review at the very end. So, thank you. Yay.
Good morning. My name is Katie Smith. I'm the Director of Elections and Voter Services here at the City of Minneapolis. A big thank you to Michelle with the League and to our gracious hosts for letting me join you and speak with you a little bit this morning about elections. When I was first asked to come and speak a little bit about election integrity, it really kind of struck me because that word lately, election integrity, we see a lot of other groups using that particular phrase, some of them using it with sort of a political spin to it or a different motivation, but election integrity and the word integrity itself is really near and dear to my heart. It's one of our 5 values that we hold as part of our mission, vision, and values statement with Minneapolis elections. And so I thought first I'd just kind of define what we mean when we start talking about election integrity. And we're really talking about ensuring the accuracy, the fairness, and the transparency of our electoral process. And that encompasses a lot of things. It's safeguarding everyone's right to vote for eligible voters without any obstruction and without any discrimination, and also ensuring that all the votes are counted accurately and that the results then reflect the true will of the people. And that's a really big and important task that my team is tasked with. Some of the key elements of how do we make that happen include our legal frameworks, our policies and procedures, and the training of our personnel. So first, I just thought I would speak a little bit about the framework that guides the work that we do, and that's our laws. There's federal laws regarding elections. Those include the Voting Rights Act. There's some sections of the Americans with Disabilities Act, and then also the Help America Vote Act that govern elections here in the U.S. We also have our state election laws. The Office of the Secretary of State provides rules, and the City of Minneapolis City Charter governs our municipal elections. So the work that we're doing and the way that we're doing things is really governed under these laws. I don't get to just make up how we're running things in Minneapolis. I have to follow the rules that are laid out before us. Those rules then become a part of our policies and our procedures. So I thought I would break down just a few. There's obviously a whole lot to talk about when we start talking about election integrity, but I thought I'd talk through some of the policies, procedures, and things that we're hearing either in the news or just in general that are kind of really big elements of our work. The first of those is voter registration. When we think about voter registration, we often think about the paper form that we fill out or going online to register to vote. But luckily here in Minnesota, we do have a lot of other options for how to get registered and get on the voter rolls to cast our ballot. One of those that Michelle talked a lot about was our automatic voter registration that just went into effect this year. It's not a new concept. We often hear motor voter. The only difference in what has changed is versus having to opt in, you would now have to opt out. We also see this acronym EDR, and that stands for Election Day Registration. It's the ability to register on the same day as a part of voting. We can do that either at the polls, we can do that during early voting, you can even do that when you vote by mail. And then another process with voter registration that protects the integrity of our rolls is our automatic list maintenance. Michelle mentioned that sometimes if you haven't voted in a while, you might have to re-register. And that's because of this process of automatic list maintenance. Every 4 years, if you haven't cast a ballot, your name is automatically inactivated. That's an effort to keep our voter rolls as accurate as possible. Doesn't mean you can't vote, just means you need to register again when you do so. Yes. The question was whether or not I meant, is it on the 4th year? And it's the January following the 4th year. So if you vote every presidential, your name would just stay on there. When we talk about voter accessibility and the measures that are brought forth in our procedures that protect that ability for everyone to participate, we might think of polling place accessibility. That's governed under statute. There are requirements that we have for being able to make sure pathways are clear. We have assistive voting devices. That's a separate piece of equipment that's available in every poll and at every early voting site. And it can zoom in on the ballot, it can read the ballot auditorily, it has some Braille instructions, and it's just another way for people to be able to cast their ballot independently. Well, accessibility, there's rules governed under statute for how accessible our polling places need to be. The doorways, the slope of any sort of entry, things like that, and we have checklists that we go out to each individual poll to ensure our polling places meet those requirements. And we also offer curbside voting, and that's the ability to vote without having to go into the polling place if you're physically unable to enter the poll. 2 election judges from 2 different parties will actually bring your materials out to you. You can cast your ballot, they'll bring it back in and insert it into the tabulator on your behalf. We offer alternative voting methods. We think a lot about election day, we talk about early voting, we talk about mail. There's also other forms of voting that we administer. That includes our healthcare facility voting, where we actually go out with a team of trained election judges and set up a miniature polling place in our healthcare facilities so residents have the ability to participate. We offer hospital voting for people who were admitted on election day that wouldn't be able to go out and cast their ballot at a regular polling place. And we offer the ability for people to vote using an agent during the last week of the election. If they're unable to come in and vote, they can designate someone to pick up their ballot and then return it on their behalf. Michelle covered quite a bit about voter verification, and that's the idea of you have to be on the voter rolls. When you come to check in, provide your name, provide your address. It has to match. If you aren't already on there, you have to go through the full registration process, including being able to prove your residency. It also includes the process for voting by mail that Michelle talked through, that you have to request your ballot. All of that information that you filled out when you applied for your ballot, whenever you send it back, has to match. You can't alter the sticker, you can't cross things out. And there's teams of 2 election judges, party balanced, whenever that comes back in the mail, that review that signature envelope to make sure it hasn't been messed with. The numbers that you provided match. If the numbers don't seem to match, they'll look at the signatures and make sure that the person who was provided this ballot is the person who voted this ballot. And then when we talk about securing the election and providing the right to vote to individuals, I think a lot about our voter outreach. We have a team of dedicated individuals that actually might, whenever you see us out at a table, sitting in a tent, that's our team. They're out there providing information on the restoration of rights, providing information on how to register, how to participate in the process. We have strict voting technology standards. They're established underneath of statute. And some of those things, when we start talking about technology, we think first right to the tabulators. It's the big hot topic in some of the newspapers. There's cybersecurity standards. Minnesota calls for paper ballots. And the results tapes themselves are printed paper. For ballot handling, Michelle mentioned the ballot board. That's the process that I was kind of hinting at here of two people from different political parties looking at each envelope. They're the ones that are actually opening those mail ballots. Ballot storage, our ballots themselves have to be stored in a secure vault. Not even everyone on my elections team has access to that vault. It's only the people who actually need access, whether that's to put them into storage or take them out and send them to the polls on election day. And then we have required testing and audits. There's 3 of them, and I'll talk a little bit about each. The first one is our public accuracy testing. And this is a method for testing all of our equipment that's going to be used at the polls. That includes the tabulation equipment, and it also includes the assistive voting devices. And then there's a second public accuracy test of the larger equipment that tabulates all of the mail ballots. And that's actually open to the public. We publish it in the newspaper. Minneapolis chooses to live stream it on our YouTube channel. We have election judges, party balanced, come in, and they take a test deck of ballots with unique outcomes for each candidate, and they run them through tabulation, make sure that the outcomes that were expected match the outcomes that that machine is given. If it were ever to fail, that equipment would not be used in the election. And that's actually the second time all of that equipment is tested for that election, because before the public accuracy test, our team does that in a preliminary test. So it's tested twice before it's ever even sent out the door to be used in an election. After the election, there's a post-election review where we actually hand count randomly drawn and selected precincts to ensure that the results that were received on election day match the results that we're getting with a hand count. And then there's a third audit, and it's the post-election audit that's administered by the Office of the Secretary of State, where we actually have to sit down with them, go through our rules, our procedures, our standards, and make sure that those are on par with the expectations of the state, or above par of the expectations of the state, which is always what we strive for. And then kind of the third prong, when we start talking about election integrity, I think of the training and the professionalization of our staff. For the people that you might encounter if you're used to voting on election day or early voting in person, there's specific roles within the polling places. Those include our precinct support judges. Those are kind of the managers of the polling place on election day. They're responsible for an entire ward within the city. They're the expert. They've been doing this, some of them, for longer than I've even been alive. They know all of the intricate detail, and they're a resource and provide oversight on election day. Within the polling place itself, there's both a head judge and an assistant head judge here in Minneapolis. Now, if you're out in rural Minnesota in a smaller polling place, some of these things might be combined, and there might not be quite as many individuals in the poll. It depends on the size of the precinct. We also have experts on poll book and registration. It's a person just assigned to that group of individuals who are working on registering people, helping people check in, and they get additional training. And then we have new, just rolled out this election, an accessibility judge role within all of our Minneapolis precincts, and that person's going to be kind of the expert on the accessibility device that I talked about, as well as knowing all of those rules about, eliminating any barriers within the poll, whether that's line of sight, line of travel, all those kinds of things. And then we have our team election judges, and that's who you're used to encountering if you've voted in person. It's the person who greets you, the person who checks you in, the individual that gets you your ballot. And our favorite position is the person who gives you your sticker when you leave. Yes. We have additional certifications that are required of our staff, of everyone working in the elections office itself. We have our municipal clerk certifications, and we also have national certification through the Election Center. It's a certified election and registration administrator certification. And all of those, whether we're talking about the polls on election day or our staff, come with continued requirements, continued education. So, with that, I will turn it back over to Michelle.
About 5 minutes. Yeah, so.
What about a bully that stands in front of you and
remember
tells
online,
you,
they can't hear you. You must use the microphone.
a bully is standing in line and saying you don't have to vote?
You should, if you encounter someone at the polling place that's trying to inhibit you from exercising your right to vote, you need to speak with an election judge. They need to intervene. That's not acceptable.
And remember, there can be no, within 100 yards of a polling, 100 yards, right, of a polling place, you can't have, electioneering going on as well. And in Minnesota, we have poll challengers, so we don't have poll watchers or people who are watching everything you do. But there has to be, again, as Katie said, and all these things, party balance. There are people who can be on site. The only thing they can do, though, is to challenge your identity. So if they think you aren't who you say you are, they can there is a process to challenge that. That's another piece in place. Yes? I'll repeat the question, Sheila, if you want to go ahead and say it.
Hi, my name is Sheila Martin. I was an election judge for 30 years. I'm under the impression that the last thing you said is that challenge person on site has to be officially, I'll say, allowed to be there. It can't be just someone in line.
Correct.
That's an official
yes, right.
process that allows someone to be that. I just have a question, perhaps for League of Women Voters, as I have a sister who said she wouldn't vote this year for the presidential election. She's not going to fill in something. And I'm sort of concerned about that and puzzled as to how I might speak with her about what that means and what not voting for a particular slot, what that means to American voting system.
Right. Well, I'll end today with one of my favorite quotes, and it's certainly John Lewis. I mean, if you are wondering why you should vote, maybe you're a young person who cares a lot about an issue and you don't care, you don't hear it being said or whatever. Why don't you pin John Lewis to your mirror and say, think of those people who fought for this right. John Lewis on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and look, it became such an amazing congressman. And I love this. He's like, ours is not the struggle of one day, 1 week, or 1 year. Ours is not the struggle of one judicial appointment or presidential term. Ours is the struggle of a lifetime, or even many lifetimes. And each one of us and every generation must do our part. Voting is our way of ensuring that just by nature of having the ability to vote is what creates a democracy. And not doing it can undo it just the same. In a real self-interested way, you could also say the bottom line is, when you do vote, then all of those candidates calls you're getting, you won't get them anymore because they'll know that you voted and you will be taken off those phone lists. That's a self-interested way, but I think it's a tough one to say. It is a choice. Whether you vote, you are making a choice either way. So I think honoring it's very important. I know we have another gentleman here with a question, and then I can follow up too. Yeah.
how would you respond to those who don't believe the system is fair?
Well, I hope you saw today, oh my gosh, you know, voting as a process and a procedure is extraordinarily accessible here, certainly here in the state of Minnesota. And people say, yeah, but what about those other states? But this can be repeated. While it's different and every state has its own measure, it's a professional activity. And certainly fairness is what's at stake. How accessible is it? How, you know, the same way you can say, well, gee, someone voted who shouldn't have voted. The same thing could be how many votes, how many people didn't get to vote because they had to stand in line for 8 hours or things like that. So it is an ongoing process. This is, you know, we have always expanded our democracy. And I share in John Lewis the hope that, you know, we have problems, we overcome them. Every year we keep going. Just because we don't get what we want or everyone doesn't like everything. I always say, how many of you, you know, your friend, you agree with everything your friends are. You know, you don't. We all have differences because that's diversity, right? But we still need to make choices. So those are hard questions, philosophical questions for another time. But I know we have 2 minutes. I'm getting to 2 minutes.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I just want to say that I've always loved voting. I'm born on August 26th, Women's Suffrage Day.
Oh, yeah.
But I learned so much today that I didn't know. So thank you both, and please join me in thanking both Michelle and Katie for the work they're doing and for letting us know about it. And then as you probably heard, next week we are going to have the Secretary of State, Minnesota Secretary of State, Steve Simon, come and speak further about the Minnesota election laws that we know. We've had a little preview of, but there's even more, and so I hope you will join us then. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.